Well, good afternoon, everyone out there. A very special event this afternoon. It's probably the first time I've ever done this, but it gives me huge pleasure to welcome György Pauk to talk about his life. He had about 5 lives, as it happens, an amazing story. And this is part of a move to publicise his memoirs, which by coincidence have just appeared. And here it is. It's a super book. It was originally in Hungarian, been translated by his wife, Susie, and edited by Stephen Foster. It's a great read, and it's available as of this week. And you can get it if you go to the website, and there's a link where you can order a copy for £15, or if you pay £25, it's signed by György as well. And all proceeds go to help support young musicians. Important to say that. Now, just to say about the structure of this little session, it's we have 3 musical excerpts with György playing. They're spacing these out. Each is about 5 or 7 minutes. So that's about 20 minutes in total. So what we're doing is having a chat firstly about the first 20 years of his life, then a musical excerpt, then the next bit, and so on, spaced out through the hour. It's a pretty eventful life we're going to cover. So I think we'll skim through, get most of the headlines in, and at the end, if you've been as fascinated as I have been in doing my homework, you'll get the book. And so it should be a jolly session. I'm very grateful to you for coming.
Well, it is a great pleasure to come back here, where I have been in this church many times in my life, through my students who have performed here many times.
Well, they all speak so highly of you, and I've known you as a legendary violinist. I've known your playing all my adult life, and I've known about your teaching in the last 20 years, but I didn't know the whole story, and of course that goes back to 1936 in Budapest. Yeah. And you were born in Budapest with middle-class parents. Say on, George.
Yeah. My father was a businessman, married to my mother, who was a pianist. She was studying together with Annie Fischer, the legendary pianist. They were colleagues together. They studied at the Liszt Academy in Budapest. So since I can remember, I heard music in our house. My mother, either she was practicing or she was playing chamber music with some colleagues. So that's what I grew up with music.
And then there were the tragic events of when you were 6, when your father went away, and 8 when your mother did.
Yes, well, I lived through some very difficult times in the war years. My father was taken away as a laborer. All the Jewish men were taken away as laborers, and in 1942, and I never saw him again. So it pains me very much to say now that I don't remember him, which is terrible and very sad. My mother stayed. I stayed with my mother, with my grandmother together, until 1944, the middle of October, when Hungarian Nazis took over Hungary, and they just went around all the apartments, all the houses, looking for young ladies. There were no men, so they took all young women away to camps and concentration camps, and left children with elderly ladies. And this is how I stayed with my grandmother until just before the end of the war. They took all the remaining Jews and took us to the ghetto, which is in Budapest, in the part of Budapest where many Jews lives. And this is where I spent the last 2-3 weeks of my life under the Nazi regime until the Russians came and liberated us around in the middle of January 1945.
And you spoke quite movingly in the book about being hungry all the time.
Well, there was not much food, and which I still remember today, and was cold. It's winter, and in Hungary, the winters are and were extremely cold, and there was no heating. So that's what I remember from my childhood: hunger, fear, and cold. So it stayed with me all in my remaining life, but of course overcame it. But it stays within yourself. Yeah.
But you had a wonderful, supportive grandmother.
I had a wonderful, supportive grandmother whose sole, she was asked by my mother to look after my son. And she certainly did that. I lived with her for years and grew up under her censorship or whatever. She was a very strict grandmother, and for her was most important that I should practice, which not many children like to practice, but I wasn't too bad, but she was very strict with me, and even occasionally just shut the door and logged me in a room. Just I had to play something, and it happened that I was playing some scares and I was watching some sports journals or something. But I must say that I had a very normal childhood in spite of losing my parents. And very early on, I was just 13 or 14, I was noticed by the most famous violin teacher and pedagogue in Hungary, Turecki, who I played for, and he accepted me in his class, which was quite exceptional because he had only mainly sort of grown-ups over 18, 20 years old, and he accepted me as a little child because of my talent. So I kept on going to the Academy for violin lessons, and in the meantime I was also going to school, which was quite difficult to do two things and doing my practice. And on top of it, I liked football playing as well. So, but I must say I had a very normal, absolutely normal childhood, not like some this wunderkind, one they say, grown up in music or whatever. Not just normal childhood.
And you went to the opera a lot.
I loved opera. I still do. And I was in a way very fortunate because Annie Fischer, who was a colleague of my mother, who was a great pianist, her husband was the director of the opera. And he allowed me and asked me to, whenever you like, whenever you wish, you are welcome to sit in my box. And I did. Very often I went, I heard, let's say, a first act of an opera, and then I rushed to the Academy, which was 5 minutes walk away, and I went to a concert.
So actually, despite the horrors of the Holocaust, your time in Soviet Hungary, despite all the repression and being locked in, was actually a very good education.
I had a wonderful education, being at the Liszt Academy, which was a very world-famous institution, still is, but nowadays living mainly off the reputation. But in those years, we all, I mean, not only the students, but all the teachers, we were all logged in the country. We were not allowed to travel anywhere. So this meant that we had the greatest living pedagogues and artists who taught us, like my teacher, as I mentioned, Turecki. I had regular lessons from Kodály, Zoltán Kodály, who was teaching Hungarian folk music, and chamber music, who the most well-known and one of the greatest musicians who lived in Hungary was Leo Weiner, composer himself, but he was a great musician. And as a student, I was asked to form a string quartet. I had to, and plus I had a sonata duo with Peter Frankel, and we had regular lessons with Leo Weiner. So I grew up in the best musical atmosphere which one can imagine.
And then at the age of 20 you were selected for the Paganini competition in Genoa.
Yes, there was nobody ever was allowed to travel to the West in those years, but that was this one occasion, one opportunity. Then there was that time the Paganini competition happened every year. Later it became only second year, and I was chosen to represent Hungary as an the solo person. And I was 20 years old, of course, had no no traveling experiences, but I was allowed to go. Even my teacher, Professor Zaturecki, he wasn't allowed to accompaniment. So the first time I went to the Western country, and it was an incredible shock to me, seeing Italy, seeing people living in free and without censorship, and that was the first time also that I saw the Mediterranean Sea, which was a very big influence on my life, and at that moment, and I mean, I won the Paganini competition, which was a wonderful achievement. The problem was that Hungarian authorities, they didn't allow me to accept many of the engagements which I was offered after winning the competitions, and just after few days after the winning the competition, I was ordered to go back to Hungary, which I did. As it happened, we're talking about October 1956. 2 or 3 days later, arriving back to Hungary, the revolution broke out, which, of course, I had no idea that it's going to happen. But again, it gave me immediately the thought, seeing Italy, seeing a Western country, that I have to, sooner or later, I will have to leave Hungary and live in a free country.
Right, so I think it's time now for our first excerpt, and it's going to be the slow movement of Mozart's first violin concerto in B-flat K207, which isn't often played, not as much as the third, fourth and fifth. George, why particularly that?
Well, it's indeed, the concerto is not very often played, but I love it, and especially the slow movement, which you are going to hear.
Yeah, right. Well, that was the Mozart First Violin Concerto, second movement. Absolutely ravishing music. Anyway, we're going through the story. We got to 1958, and you got back from Hungary in 1956, having won the Paganini competition, but realizing you want to spend your life eventually in the West. And you did that when you went to Paris.
Yes.
And defected there. Do you want to say about that?
Yes, of course. When I left Hungary in 1950, I had some concerts. Through the Paganini competition, I was invited to give some concerts in Paris. So before I left for the journey, I knew that this will be the last time I'm leaving Hungary. For me, the big problem was, of course, grandmother, because I loved her, of course, and she loved me very much, and I knew that I'm going to, if I'm defecting, I'm going to the West. Who knows how many years it will take that I will see her again, or at all. But I decided that my career, my life was perhaps more important. And so I left Hungary in 1958, giving concerts in Paris. As soon as the concerts were done, I went to the police in Paris and asked for political asylum. So that was a very, very big thing to do, because I knew my life was in front of me, but I didn't know what I'm going to do. By this time, Zaturecki, my teacher, ex-teacher, was in America. He was professor in Bloomington, Indiana, and he would have loved me to come and join him. But at that time, I had no papers, really only French refugee papers, which I wasn't allowed to go to America. And by that time, the quota also was finished in America for the university. So I was in Paris, and I felt that it's a wonderful city, and I love the place. But as a musician, I thought that my future doesn't lie here. As it happened, from my early days at the academy, I had a wonderful colleague, the viola player of my string quartet, Erwin Schiffer, who lived in Holland. He was the first violist of one of the orchestras in Holland, and I was in touch with him. And then once he told me, our orchestra is looking for a concertmaster. Second concertmaster, first concertmaster, as they said. They are looking. Would you be interested? And I had nothing else to do. And as I said earlier, I didn't see my future in France. I went to Holland and applied auditions for this position, and I was offered a job. This was the first time I was in Holland, which right from the beginning I found the country, the people, very friendly and like home. I almost felt like home. So I got the job, and I moved over to Holland. This is the September 1958. As it happened, it's all in the book is written down. It's one of those stories which if you hear it told by somebody else, you don't believe it, but it happened to me. That this very same Erwin, who he invited me to Holland to join the orchestra, he met he was in Amsterdam, and he was just walking and heard some Hungarian voices talking. And he went to see these people and talked that I'm Hungarian too, and they started to discussion. And as it turned out, he said that he's a musician, and he used to be a student at the Liszt Academy, and he played quartets together with a certain Pauk, a certain György Pauk, and we used to have a string quartet. And now I'm very happy in my job. And that's how the name suddenly came up. And this couple who was sitting there in the coffee house in Amsterdam had a daughter, a young, beautiful daughter. And this Erwin just told the parents, and would you like to visit me in 's-Hertogenbosch, to meet my friends, to hear music. And as it happened, a few weeks later, this girl, Susanna, came to visit him and invited me over to meet. And that
The
was
rest is history.
the rest is history.
The back of the church now.
That's the back of the church. And she became, I loved her immediately as I saw her. And we both were very, very young, but we felt, we started a new life in a strange country, and we thought that perhaps together it will be easier.
And you then went in for the Jack Thibault competition, which was a very prestigious competition.
Well, that's after winning the Paganini competition, I felt that I had still the energy and the know-how to go to another big competition, which the Jacques Thibault competition was in Paris. So I applied and I was accepted, which was a year later. I met still at this competition. Jacques Thibault wasn't alive, but the competition is called Jacques Thibault Margaret Long competition. And Margaret Long was still alive, and I met Jacques Thibault's widow. It was a very demanding, very big competition in those years, and I received the first prize.
I should say, George is too modest, but there is actually a video on YouTube which surfaced about 50 years later of the gala concert of a performance of the Brahms concerto when he was 22. I would advise any violinophiles to go and play it because it's absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
You can't say that, but I can.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
I like it.
Oh, God. I got it somewhere if you like it. Good.
Yes. This was the gala concert.
Yeah.
By winning the first prize, I was given this opportunity, but I had no idea and I didn't remember that it was televised.
Yeah.
So it was a great surprise for me and a wonderful surprise that it was televised. So I have the Brahms Violin Concerto. I listened to it when I was 22 years old.
And after that, you met Menuhin?
Menuhin I knew already in Hungary.
Yeah.
Because he came to play 1956. And I had the opportunity to play for him. So he heard me playing. And I made sure, when I was living in Holland, every time he came to Holland and he played in Amsterdam, I went to his concert and I met him and kept up some kind of friendship and relationship. And he suggested to me after one of his concerts that, why are you here in Holland? It's a lovely country, but I think you should come and live in England. London is the capital city of music, and I think you would be very happy, and you should come to live in London. I said I would with great pleasure, but at that time I had a Dutch refugee passport, and I was allowed to travel because by that time I traveled quite a lot concertizing, but I couldn't ask for another political asylum in England. So the only way I was allowed to come was that he gave a letter of recommendation to the Home Office, saying that I'm studying with him and he's looking after my well-being, and that the Home Office should allow me to stay in the country for some time. So we arrived, newlyweds, we arrived to England on a beautiful September day, arrived to London with our little car. I had a little car in Holland, and stopped on the Waterloo Bridge, looked around, and immediately both we felt we arrived home.
Right, well,
And that was exactly 60 years ago.
it's terrific. And you did your Wigmore in 1962, and that links into the next excerpt, which is Bartók's Sonata for Solo Violin, the Melodia movement. Do you want to say a brief word about that?
Yes, well, the Bartók Solo Sonata is perhaps one of the most difficult pieces written for the instrument, I feel. And I don't understand now that Zátureczky, my teacher, allowed me to study it, age of 18. If I'm thinking about it now, technically, obviously, I was able to play it, but musically I'm sure I didn't understand very much of the piece. It's one of Bartók's last compositions. But I was strong enough, and I decided that on such an important date, like a debut recital in London, it should include one of the great pieces written for the violin, the Bartók Solo Sonata.
Right, shall we hear that now? Right, that was the Bartok solo sonata, Melodia movement. George, you want to say something about it?
Well, it's, as I said, it's one of the great pieces written for the violin, and it's connected with Menuhin, because Menuhin ordered it from Bartok, and he paid for it.
Yeah.
So this is another connection with the solo sonata, and also that the London papers immediately noticed that I played the solo sonata and had wonderful reviews in the papers. So playing the Bartok finally very much paid off. And of course, later in life, I performed it many times and recorded it.
And that was the start of a career lasting about 50 years, with you reckon about almost 3,000 orchestral performances.
Orchestral and chamber music performances.
And about 80 to 100 concerts a year. Around the globe, all the continents, most of the time. Pretty tough life, actually.
Well, I wasn't complaining. Well, just to say, London in the 60s, 70s, as Menuhin said to me, it was gold. I mean, many of my colleagues, young musicians lived here. Radu Lupu, Barenboim, Futsong, all the conductors came. They wanted to conduct in England, Scholti and Dorati, and many of the Ghetto. They all wanted to give concerts in London, and I had the sense, and I was told, and I knew that what is important in an artist's life is meeting people, meeting great musicians, playing for conductors. And this is what happened in my time, early life in London, that I met all these great musicians, and they started to know me. Scholti particularly engaged me, and like many conductors, when they heard that Scholti has engaged somebody, now then I have to engage him or her again also.
Now,
so this
Scholti links nicely into the events when you went to Chicago and your violin. Do you want to
Yes. Well, it was just the year when we came to England, it was exactly the same when Scholti was appointed to be music director of Covent Garden.
Yeah.
10 years later, exactly 10 years later, he was appointed Chicago Symphony Orchestra chief conductor. And by that time, we played together quite a few times. And he invited me to make my American debut with the Chicago Symphony, which is up to today also one of the great orchestras of the world. And so I had the opportunity to, again, like the Wigmore Hall, it gave me a platform to show my artistry, and the concerts were very successful, and I had wonderful reviews. Immediately, the managements started to smell that he is a young artist whom it's important to manage, and so I was accepted to the same management as Scholti, and they had Visha Diska, great conductors and singers. So this gave me a wonderful platform and start to my American career. And when other orchestras heard that I had this success in Chicago, then they immediately started to inquire. Philadelphia, Cleveland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, all the greatest orchestras of America engaged me.
And you had the good fortune to meet someone.
Yes, well, I think I was immediately, by the way, re-invited to Chicago Symphony. Yeah. And on the second occasion, a gentleman arrived to the artist's room and introduced himself. He was a violin collector, and he was a businessman and quite a good amateur violinist. And he introduced himself and asked me, would I be interested to see some of his instruments? By that time, I was playing on a very nice Guadagnini, JB Guadagnini instruments, which I purchased with some friends' help in London. That's what I made my first concert in America, but it wasn't not a great instrument. But this man, Gottlieb, asked me, would you like to see my instrument? Would you like to try them? And of course, the violinists cannot say no to these kind of things. And so he came to my hotel room and brought with him 4 or 5 Stradivariuses, Del Jesus, it's some wonderful instruments. And I was playing, and of course, I immediately noticed the difference with my relatively less valued Guadagnini, and played. And I particularly remember that I liked one of the instruments. It suited me. It's always the sound which one is looking for. The quality of the sound suited me. And after perhaps a couple of hours, my wife was there with me, and we had a plane to catch that afternoon to Canada. So I became a little bit restless, and so he asked, now, which of these instruments you really like and you feel sort of comfortable and like the sound? And I pointed to one of these Stradivariuses, which was, I didn't know the name then, it was the Massart Stradivarius. Massart was a great Belgian violinist of the 19th century, and the instrument used to belong to him. And he turned to me and he said, "This is yours. You can have it." And at that moment, I almost fainted, of course. But of course, it was a most wonderful and pleasant surprise. And the same afternoon, as I said earlier, we left with 2 instruments. I had the Stradivarius and the Guadagnini with me, and it was a wonderful feeling to play on such a great instrument. It took me again. One needs to have some time to get used to the size and the quality of this, how to handle an instrument. But with such great instrument, it goes quite quickly. So I came back to England and started to concertize on the Stradivarius. So it's one of the stories which it's unbelievable, but it did happen to me.
Yeah. And then the other 2 big things were, of course, your trio, which was a major part of your artistic life and was very famous.
Well, by that time, I had such a name as a soloist, and I was concertizing sort of 78 concerts a year. But chamber music was always part of my life. And as a soloist, I feel that playing a piano trio is still possible. I mean, it needs the same kind of approach as a soloist. For a string quartet, you need totally different way of playing. But for a piano trio, is how we discovered each other. We were 3 well-known soloists, and we started to play trios together, but we took it very seriously, which of course I always, music has to be taken seriously. And slowly we started to build up a wonderful repertoire. We had the fortune at that time. By that time, I recorded most of the sonata repertoire for the BBC, so they wanted to hear me again in different format. And this is how came the trio. So the BBC offered immediately, even before we started to play concerts, it offered us 6 or 7 recordings playing all the romantic piano trios together with a Mozart trio. So this is how we started our trio life, recording the 6 romantic big trios for the BBC.
Well,
our first concert took place in the Edinburgh Festival.
Yeah.
So if I'm thinking about it now, it's quite a big risk to give for it. But we were already then, 3 very experienced players, and
wonderful.
It was just
heavenly
we enjoyed.
Stuff.
Yes.
And then the other big was your commissions and playing new works by living composers.
Yes. London, as I mentioned, was the capital city of London, and many of the great composers came to London, came to perform, to compose. They had commissions to compose their pieces. And for instance, one of the first who I had the pleasure to work with was Witold Lutosławski, who wrote a new violin concerto for the Zacher Foundation in Zurich. And it was already performed once in Zurich, but he asked me, I met Lutosławski, and he asked me, would you be interested to play it with me in a London performance, the London concert. And of course I looked at the music and I immediately fell in love with the piece. And we performed it. We gave the first performance with the London Sinfonietta in the Queen Elizabeth Hall, with Lutosławski conducting. So this gave me a wonderful opportunity, which the piece I have performed many, many times all over the world.
This leads very well into the third excerpt, which is of a movement from Lutosławski's work, which is called Chain 2.
Yes.
Why is it called Chain 2?
Because he wrote 4 chains for different instruments, and this as happens to be, I don't know, he called it chain. The first one for orchestra, the third one for piano, and the fourth, I think, with viola. So this is Chain 2.
Okay, off we go. Well, that was Lutosławski's Chain 2 for violin and orchestra, the second movement, with George giving the UK premiere. We're almost out of time, but we couldn't let this session go without talking at some length about your teaching career, because you're a legendary teacher, and that's how we know each other. Because over the last 15 years, various of your star pupils have been coming here and playing wonderfully well. This stems from your appointment as professor of the violin at the Academy, which you've been for 30 years.
Yes.
And you obviously get a hell of a lot out of it.
Well, especially the last 15 years that I stopped my career. But teaching was always in my mind that once I get a little bit older and I don't want to travel so much and give concerts, I will accept a position. And I was offered many positions, especially in America, which I declined because I didn't want to live in America. But when the Royal Academy approached me, that was close to home. And the Royal Academy is perhaps, I would say, the best highest standard school in the country. And they offered me a principal position of conducting a special performers class. I couldn't say no. And of course the Academy was counting on my international name that I attracted many talented young players. And through my travels all over the world, I heard young talented players whom some of them I invited to London. So I had a really very high class and wonderfully gifted young players who studied with me. What was important for me is what I learned from my own teacher. And a little bit perhaps we could talk about it. My teacher was the continuation of the so-called Hungarian Violin School, which started with Josef Joachim and continued some years later with Hubai. And my teacher, Zaturecki, was a pupil of Hubai. So I kind of feel myself that the representative of the Hungarian, once famous Hungarian Violin School. And this is what I was, and my position at the Royal Academy is called Chair of Ede Zaturecki. So somehow you're also showing my appreciation.
And the key features of the Hungarian Violin School, if you like to summarize it.
Yeah, what I was told and I was taught and feel that it's particular the beauty, the natural beauty of the sound, of the way the sound is taken out from an instrument, the way one holds the bow, the way one holds the violin, the coordination between the two hands, and how to produce a lovely sound. Like a singer who has a lovely voice, a violin, it depends on the player, what kind of sound he or she can produce, especially with a great instrument.
And I like the fact you get your pupils to sing things so they get the shapes of the phrases and the breathing.
As we mentioned earlier, I'm a great opera lover, and everything depends, comes from the opera. So the most natural way of singing is singing. And the most natural way of breathing is by singing or talking. And you always talk and always take breath when you have to. And this it should be in the music as well.
And one of your pupils said you were known as Mr. Sustain, but oh, sustain, sustain. That seems to be a bit out of fashion now.
Yeah, well, I still say it's more simple. Well, like a singer, again, you know, you have to sustain the sound to produce long phrases.
Yeah.
And therefore, my nickname is Mr. Sustain, and I have a T-shirt which says Sustain, which looks very funny,
I know,
but it's true.
I don't know. It seems so obvious, but it seems to have gone slightly out of fashion, but who knows?
Yeah.
We're old. I mean, of all, you've been so often to concerts here, and I was always very impressed. One of the early concerts, when I didn't really know you, and I said something like, it's a great pleasure this evening to have the eminent Hungarian violinist György Pauk. And you yelled from the back, I might have been born in Hungary, but I've been in the UK for 50 years, and I'm British. And that was rather touching, I thought.
Well, not only touchy, but true. as I said earlier, from the first day I've arrived to this country to look through the Waterloo Bridge, I said, this is home. And I feel at home, and I'm called a Hungarian-born British violinist.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of it.
Well, it's been a memorable hour. It's 5 o'clock. For those who weren't watching at the start, part of the purpose of this afternoon's fascinating session was to plug this book, which has just come out. It's George's memoirs, which were originally in Hungarian, been translated by Susie, his wife, into English and edited by Stephen Foster. It's absolutely fascinating. It's a super read, and you can get it if you go to our website. There's a link there. And you can either get it for £15, and all the money, I stress, all the proceeds from everything are going to help young musicians. And if you want a signed copy for £25, it's well spent money. And so please think about buying this. It's been a memorable afternoon. We've never done anything quite like this before, but what a life story. It's so impressive. And I have to say, without wishing to embarrass you, the reputation you have amongst all your young people, and I'm thinking of all Sadie Fields, Christine Balanas, Charlotte Bonneton, Julia Paske, Matilda Midwitsky, and Eriko Nagayama, who happens to be playing here a week today.
Yeah.
And they all think the absolute world of you, which says something, and so you should be very proud. A remarkable gentleman. And it's been an amazing session. If you'd like to show your appreciation, and I'd also just like to say before I finish, thank you very much to our technical staff, Simon Shute and Rob Jenkins, who've done a fabulous job, rather tricky session, various photographs and things, but they've added quite a lot to it. And thank you very much for watching. And as always with these things, all donations go to support musicians. We're all unpaid volunteers. No one gets paid here. So if you could go to our website and donate, I would be very grateful. We'll start having concerts with a live audience again in September if Boris allows us to. But for the moment, we're totally dependent on your donations. So thank you very much for your support. Our next concert is on Tuesday. We have 3 a week. But today has been something else. Thank you very much, George.
Great pleasure.
It's been memorable.
It's like home.
The hour's gone very quickly. So with that, good afternoon, and thank you for being with us.